In the fading light of a September day in 1519, 5 ships slipped quietly out of a Spanish harbor. They were shadows on the water, carrying within their wooden hulls not just supplies, but 270 men and one incredibly dangerous idea. This wasn't a quest for gold. Not truly. It wasn't about claiming new lands for the crown. The cargo was far more ambitious, far more perilous. It was a bid for immortality. At the heart of this audacious gamble stood one man, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator sailing for the Spanish king. He was a man forged from grit and unwavering conviction. He believed the world, in all its vastness, could be conquered by will alone. To the court of Spain, he had promised a prize beyond imagination. A new western route to the fabled Spice Islands, a path that would bypass their Portuguese rivals and funnel the riches of the East directly into Spanish coffers. But there was one thing Magellan never promised. One truth he kept locked away in the captain's cabin. He never promised survival. From the very beginning, the voyage felt cursed. As they sailed south along the coast of South America, the Atlantic Ocean, once a familiar highway, turned hostile. The waves grew monstrous. The winds tore at the sails with a vicious howl. This wasn't just a storm, it was a warning. By the time they reached the frozen, desolate wastelands of what we now call Patagonia, the fleet was forced to make a desperate winter camp. The cold was a physical entity, a predator that gnawed at their bones. Storms shattered their morale as easily as they splintered masts. Below decks, the food began to rot. Water turned foul. Men, once hopeful sailors, now shivered in the perpetual twilight, their bodies succumbing to the frost, their minds to despair. And in that despair, whispers began to spread through the ships, a contagion more deadly than any sickness. Magellan is a madman. He is leading us to our graves. This wasn't exploration. It was a suicide mission. The Spanish captains, already distrustful of their Portuguese commander, fanned the flames of discontent. The whispers grew into plots, hatched in the flickering candlelight of cramped, damp cabins. Then, one night, the plots exploded into open rebellion. Mutiny. In the suffocating darkness, steel flashed. The sharp clang of swords echoed across the icy water, followed by the cries of men. Blood, dark and thick, stained the very decks that were meant to be their home. But Magellan was not a man to be trifled with. He was as ruthless as the sea itself. The rebellion was crushed with brutal efficiency. His response was a calculated act of terror. The ringleaders were executed publicly, their punishments drawn out, designed to be slow and unforgiving. Others were marooned, left to die on the barren, windswept shores of Patagonia. In the aftermath, a chilling silence fell over the fleet. Fear had replaced loyalty. The men would follow Magellan, not out of respect, but out of sheer terror of what he would do to them if they refused. With the crew cowed into submission, Magellan pushed onward, searching for the fabled strait that would lead them to the other side of the continent. They found it, a twisting, violent maze of rock and ice, a labyrinth of treacherous currents, and sudden hurricane-force winds. For 38 agonizing days, they navigated the passage that would one day bear Magellan's name. One ship deserted. Turning back for Spain, its crew convinced the journey was doomed. The others pressed on, their wooden hulls groaning under the strain. The men on constant alert, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. It felt less like sailing and more like a descent into a liquid hell. When the 3 remaining ships finally emerged from the strait's narrow confines, the ocean that stretched before them was a vision of tranquility. It was vast, empty, and eerily calm. A profound sense of relief washed over the exhausted crew. Believing the worst was over, Magellan named it the Pacific, the peaceful sea. He couldn't have been more wrong. This calm was not a blessing. It was a curse. The Pacific became their prison. The winds died, leaving them adrift under a blistering, relentless sun. The biscuit barrels were emptied, revealing only dust and worm-eaten fragments. They began to eat the leather that wrapped the ship's yardarms, soaking it in seawater for days to make it soft enough to chew. They hunted the ship's rats, selling them to one another for a fortune. Fresh water became a distant memory, replaced by a putrid yellow liquid that reeked of decay. Then came the scurvy. It rotted their gums, which swelled up over their teeth, turning black and spongy. Their teeth loosened and fell out. Their joints swelled, their bodies covered in sores. The men grew too weak to even stand, let alone work the sails. They died slowly, painfully, their voices stolen by the disease until they could only groan. The silence that fell upon the ships was worse than the sound of any storm. It was the sound of hope dying. By the time they finally sighted land, the island of Guam, nearly half of the crew that had entered the Pacific was gone, their bodies committed to its silent, deep waters. They had survived the crossing, but the voyage's architect would not complete the circle. In the Philippines, Magellan, driven by a fatal mix of missionary zeal and political ambition, embroiled himself in a local conflict. He made a fateful decision to lead a small force of his men against a native chieftain named Lapu-Lapu on the island of It was a battle that was never his to fight. Grossly underestimating his opponent, Magellan charged ashore. He and his men were immediately swarmed. Hopelessly outnumbered, a poisoned arrow pierced his leg. A bamboo spear struck his face. He fought on, but he was surrounded. He fell in the shallow surf, hacked to pieces by the island's warriors. The man who chased immortality had vanished into history. His body never recovered. The voyage fell apart. Without their leader, chaos reigned. More men were killed in betrayals and ambushes. The survivors, now a skeletal remnant of the original crew, had to abandon one of their ships. The final two limped on towards the Spice Islands, finally reaching their goal, only to face the daunting task of getting home. One ship tried to recross the Pacific and failed. The last remaining vessel, the Victoria, undertook a desperate race back to Spain, sailing across the Indian Ocean and around Africa, constantly hiding from Portuguese fleets. 3 years after they had departed, in September 1522, a single ghost ship limped into the Spanish harbor. On board 18 men, gaunt and skeletal, staggered ashore. 18 survivors out of the original 270. They were the first men to have ever circumnavigated the globe. They had proven beyond all doubt that the world was round, that its oceans were connected. They had achieved the impossible, but they had paid for that knowledge with nearly every life aboard. This was not a glorious voyage of discovery. It was a brutal, relentless war against the planet itself. And in the end, the planet had won. Their journey stands as a testament not just to human ambition, but to the terrifying, unforgiving price of obsession. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the depths of history.